edition of Stranger Thinking Media, where we bring you the gospel of Yahushua HaMashiach, Jesus the Christ, to address the problems of a modern world. So, stay tuned. We have an awesome show for you today.
So much going on in the world right now. I've been covering the Russia-Ukraine war and now possibly a Middle East war or World War III. We are right now in the midst of a heated situation on the Gaza Strip with Israel and Hamas, and now finding out that Iran has been supporting them and Iran got money from the United States. It's a big mess. And here to help clarify is Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gobb. Colonel Gobb, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, Stephen, it's a pleasure to join you. And like you said, it's a tough time to be on, having to talk about the things that we're going to have to talk about. But yeah. I think it's best that the Americans all understand what's happening and why.
Yeah. So this situation's been horrifying. I've been monitoring it all weekend. I'm watching missiles launched and taking out buildings. I'm watching bombs go off, people screaming for their life, dust blowing into the air, watching families with young children be attacked and kidnapped in real time. How did the United States CIA and Israel's Mossad miss such a huge situation? How were they so caught off guard by this attack?
Yeah, from the intelligence community, I will tell you that is the question of the year at this point. But I guess I would start off by asking the question, did they not know? And then, because it's going to take some convincing to tell me that none of them, and also, by the way, Shin Bet in Israel didn't know something. Now, I'm willing to be wrong, and I'm hopefully wrong. And somehow this is just one of the world's largest intelligence failures. But we're talking about one of the most surveilled borders in the world. The comparisons are essentially North and South Korea, and that's really about it, as far as people with eyes on an intelligence system and everything that's extremely mature on a very small piece of ground. How this is missed is amazing to me. And so it's going to take a bit to tell me that this something wasn't known somewhere.
Yeah, it reminds me of 9/11, where it's like, okay, I don't want to become a conspiracy theorist, but there's like so many failures in the intelligence apparatus that it does make one wonder, was a blind eye turned? Did they know something was coming? What really happened in the Gaza Strip this weekend?
I think it gives us a safe ground to stand on, to say that it's worth asking the question, being skeptical. It doesn't mean that either one of us is necessarily sitting here saying that we know they did know, or we know that they didn't know. But if we just assume they didn't know and assume everything else away, then I guess we're avoiding maybe the harder question.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The other thing that's concerning to me, Colonel, is Iran. We now know that Iran was helping Hamas in planning the secret attack. And not long ago, the United States returned $6 billion in cash to Iran in exchange for 5 Americans. So while that's happening, we're giving them back massive amounts of cash, literally planning an attack on Israel. Now we have people being kidnapped, hoping to create terror, hoping to receive large sums of cash in exchange for American hostages. I mean, how bad of an idea was it that President Biden so publicly gave billions of dollars to Iran in exchange for American lives?
There's a lot there, that's for sure. Well, let's start out by saying that really all we're dealing with is Obama foreign policy failure version 3.0. And that's exactly what you're seeing. And what is that foreign policy failure? It's magnifying and paying off our enemies, such as Iran, and driving a wedge between even allies in the Middle East. I mean, let's look back to the Abraham Accords. in what Trump was doing, trying to create a quasi NATO structure with Middle Eastern nations cooperating against the greatest threats like Iran. And what I would simply call not terrorist organizations, but non-uniformed members of Iran's military. You would call them Hezbollah and Hamas. I'm just going to call this a foreign invasion into Israel facilitated by Iran. And I don't blame Israel at all for saying that they're going to go into the Gaza Strip and clean it out. In fact, that is exactly what I expected as we continued to watch what was happening in Israel going past the last few months. And the reason why is because of things like the Yom Kippur dates. The Jewish calendar is worth watching when it comes to critical events in world history. And whether it's cosmically aligned for some reason, it doesn't really matter. The dates were used for a reason. And that's worth taking a look at. Now, there's also another piece, and then I'll hand it back to you, which is this $6 billion, which is just, again, another version of Obama 3.0, where we're paying Iran stacks of cash, and we expect them to use this money for humanitarian reasons. I hope nobody is really naive and thinks that that's what would happen with the money. This argument right now is that, well, this money never actually got there. It's still frozen in an account, and they don't have it. And it's also only supposed to be used for humanitarian goods and reasons. Well, first of all, it doesn't matter whether the money's there or not at this point. The whole point being that we were willing to pay them for our own hostages. And we're naive enough to think that Iran's not going to take that $6 billion and in some way use it to ensure they can keep funding their little terrorist proxy armies out to the north and to the southwest of Israel. This is a tragedy if you focus on at the human level. There's no doubt about it. And the people who committed are at fault and should be held accountable. But when it comes to nations, I'm willing to point my finger at Iran. I'm willing to point my finger at a lot of different places, but I'm going to start by telling the people in Washington, D.C. that that's where the act needs to get cleaned up first.
So yeah, this was my first worry when I saw this money was being released back was, number one, are other people going to start kidnapping Americans hoping to get over $1 billion per American? And then number two, was Iran going to use this money to support Vladimir Putin in attacking Ukraine? Little did I suspect that this money would end up going towards attacking Israel, possibly. I mean, again, we don't know what's happened with that money, but we do know that the United States said to the American citizen, this money is being released for humanitarian aid only. And that same day, over in Iran, they said, we'll use that money however we want. The United States doesn't tell us what to do. So there's clearly a disconnect on what that money was going to be used for. Another friend of mine, Colonel Tony Schaefer, he sent me a video this morning of just in the last week, National Security Advisor to the White House, Jake Sullivan, said, all is well in the Middle East. In fact, it hasn't been this quiet in decades. So is there a possibility that our intelligence apparatus was sitting back on their laurels, or things were quiet and so they weren't being as active in their gathering of intelligence? Could it be that they were overwhelmed with intelligence and didn't know how to sift through all of it? I'm just trying to figure out why the lead person at the White House would say all is well and quiet in the Middle East, and a week later we're seeing the horrific images on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC.
Well, I guess you could say that the potentials are always there for resting on laurels, but when it comes to this administration saying something and the opposite happening, it seems to be more their modus operandi than out of the usual. So, when Biden comes on and makes a statement that we will stand behind Israel, and I say, okay, ask the Afghans how well you should believe that. And frankly, if the CIA were really looking all that hard in the Middle East, they probably would have seen it. But I don't think you're just simply not going to see something if you're not looking for it in the first place. And yeah, you can wrap your tinfoil hat up a little bit and stick it on top of your head and say, were we part of orchestrating this? Well, directly or indirectly, I would say the messaging that we've set up by putting Iran back on a pedestal as a friend of ours who we're willing to bribe for hostages, in many ways, we are at fault for this.